The voice echoed through Kira's mind like a death knell, though she couldn't say if it came from memory or prophecy. 3 trials. That is the price of defying death itself. She stood at the edge of the world, where the frozen earth met the bruised sky, and watched the death veil descend. The storm came once a decade, a supernatural blizzard that scoured the whitewater wastes clean of everything living. Most who saw it coming had already fled south to safer territories. But Kira had nowhere else to run. At 24, she'd made peace with exile. 5 years of surviving alone in these brutal lands had carved away the softer parts of her, leaving only steel and stubbornness. Her fur-lined armor bore the scars of 100 hunts, her bow had never failed her, and her small shelter held enough supplies to outlast most storms. But not this one. The death veil swallowed the horizon, turning afternoon into twilight. Shadow wolves, lesser spirits that fed on the dying, already circled at the storm's edge, waiting. Behind Kira, strapped to her hunting sled, lay the reason she couldn't simply take shelter and pray. The black wolf was massive, easily twice the size of any natural wolf, with midnight fur that seemed to absorb light. When she'd found him collapsed in the snow an hour ago, blood staining the white ground beneath him, she'd known immediately what he was, a shifter, caught between forms by poison and trauma. She'd also known what the purple-black veins spreading from his wounds meant. Shadow Thorn. The assassination weapon of choice for those targeting royalty. Kira had chosen exile over chains when Alpha Broderick demanded she accept his bond 5 years ago. She'd walked away from her pack, her family, her future, everything except her freedom and her honor. Now she would face death itself rather than let an innocent die on her watch, even if saving him painted a target on her back. The wolf's amber eyes, flecked with gold, had opened once. Just long enough to whisper one word with his dying breath, please. 3 impossible trials to gather 3 impossible ingredients. The storm would kill her. The trials would kill her. But cowardice would destroy her. Kira tightened the straps on the sled and turned north, directly into the death veil's black heart. 3 trials then, she muttered, checking her weapons one final time. I've survived worse. She hadn't, actually. But the lie gave her courage enough to take the first step. Kira worked by firelight, her hands steady despite the storm's howl outside the shallow cave. The black wolf lay on her only blanket, his breathing shallow and irregular. Purple-black veins had spread from the wound in his shoulder, creeping toward his heart like grasping fingers. She crushed winter mint and bloodroot into a paste, mixing it with melted snow. It wouldn't cure shadowthorn poisoning, nothing could except the 3 ingredients she needed, but it might buy him another few hours. She worked the paste into his wound, and his massive body shuddered. I know, she murmured. I know it hurts. The Ice Wraith Caves lay 2 miles north, directly into the death veil's teeth. Kira strapped her twin daggers to her thighs, checked her arrows half standard, half fire-tipped, and tucked smoke bombs into her belt. Her fingers lingered on the small vial of wolfsbane extract she always carried. Insurance, in case she ever needed a quick death. She'd never imagined she might welcome it. The temperature plummeted the moment she entered the caves. Her breath crystallized instantly, ice forming on her eyelashes. The cave walls glittered with an unnatural luminescence, beautiful and deadly. Somewhere in the darkness, something whispered in a language older than pack law. The first wraith materialized from the ice itself, a spectral figure of frost and malice, with hollow eyes that burned with hunger. Kira didn't hesitate. She fired a light arrow directly into its chest. The creature shrieked, a sound like breaking glass, and shattered into 1,000 fragments. But 3 more took its place. She moved on instinct, and years of combat training Alpha Broderick had never managed to strip away. Fire arrows created bursts of light that sent the wraiths recoiling. When they got too close, her daggers flashed, the spelled silver cutting through spectral flesh. She used the cave itself as a weapon, kicking support icicles free to create barriers and traps. But there were too many. Cold fingers wrapped around her throat, draining her life force in seconds. Her vision blurred. Her legs buckled. The wraiths closed in, drawn by the warmth of her fading life. Through dimming vision, she saw it, a nest of crystallized phoenix tears glowing in the deepest chamber, surrounded by a dozen wraiths standing sentinel. Kira's hand found a smoke bomb. She threw it hard against the ice wall, where it exploded into brilliant flame. Then another, and another. She ripped a strip from her cloak, set it ablaze with her last fire arrow, and spun it overhead like a beacon. The reflected light multiplied across the crystalline walls, turning the cave into a sun. The wraiths scattered with inhuman screams. Kira lunged forward, snatched the glowing tears, and ran. Behind her, the cave groaned. Ice cracked. The ceiling began to fall. She burst into the storm just as the entrance collapsed behind her, frost-bitten fingers clutching the first ingredient. Blood soaked her side where a wraith's claws had torn through her armor. Back in the shelter, she administered the phoenix tears to the wolf's wound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the purple-black veins receded slightly, and his breathing deepened. His amber eyes flickered open, meeting hers. 2 more trials, Kira whispered, already preparing for the next impossible task. The valley spread before her like a graveyard of glass and ice. 300 years ago, 2 kingdoms had met here in brutal combat, and the battle mages had sown the ground with frost mines, arcane weapons that turned moisture into explosive shards. The war ended, the kingdoms fell, but the mines remained, waiting beneath innocent snow for unwary weight to wake them. In the valley's heart, where no sane creature would venture, midnight frost flowers bloomed in defiance of death itself. Kira crouched on the ridge, studying the field through the death veil's sideways snow. Her side ached where the wraith had torn her, and frostbite blackened the tips of 2 fingers. Behind her, in the cave shelter, the black wolf clung to life by a thread made of phoenix tears and stubbornness. She couldn't see the mines beneath the snow, but she could read the land. Slight depressions. Unusual ice formations. Places where nothing grew, even in summer's memory. She memorized the pattern, then nocked an arrow and fired. The explosion sent ice shards screaming through the air in a deadly radius. Where the mine had been, a crater of frozen earth remained. Kira fired again. And again. Each triggered mine revealed a piece of the puzzle, mapping safe ground between invisible death. She descended into the valley, testing each step with her bow before committing her weight. Left foot. Pause. Right foot. Breathe. The wind screamed, shifting fresh snow over her carefully memorized pattern. She adjusted, reading the land by instinct now more than sight. Halfway across, she heard them, the ice-touched wolves. They'd been normal wolves once, before the death veil's magic had frozen them from the inside out. Now they were mindless hunting machines, their fur crystallized into razor-sharp spikes, their eyes blank as winter sky. And they charged directly into the minefield with no regard for danger. The first wolf's weight triggered a mine. The explosion set off two more in a chain reaction. Ice shards ripped through the pack, but the survivors kept coming, now directly toward Kira. She couldn't run. Running meant certain death on a mine. She couldn't stay still. The wolves would tear her apart. So she fought. Arrow after arrow, each shot placed with surgical precision to drop wolves without triggering the mines beneath them. When they got too close, her daggers flashed. She moved in careful patterns, turning the field itself into her ally, herding the ice-touched creatures toward explosive ground. The midnight frost flowers glowed blue-black in the field center, surrounded by the densest cluster of mines. Kira triggered the mines deliberately with arrow shots, creating a circle of craters. She lunged through the chaos, grabbed handfuls of flowers, and rolled clear as another wolf leaped for her throat. Her dagger found its heart mid-leap. The remaining ice-touched wolves regrouped for another charge. Kira fired 3 arrows in rapid succession, not at the wolves, but at the mines surrounding them. The chain reaction was devastating. Ice and earth and crystallized wolf parts erupted skyward. She ran. A shard of ice buried itself in her thigh. She stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. Behind her, the valley collapsed into cascading explosions. In the shelter, she ground the midnight frost flowers into paste with trembling hands and applied them to the wolf's wound. The purple-black veins receded further. His breathing strengthened. His amber eyes opened, focused on her for the first time with something like awareness. "Your name." The voice was rough, barely audible. "Kira." She was already checking her weapons, preparing for the final trial. "Save your strength." 1 trial left. The cliff face rose into oblivion, disappearing into the death veil's churning darkness. Sky Fawn Peak. 1,000 feet of ice-slicked rock and ancient rage. At its summit, moon lilies bloomed for a single hour during the storm's peak, their petals capturing starlight that hadn't touched Earth in a decade. Kira's hands shook as she secured her climbing harness. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandage on her thigh. Her side screamed with each breath. 2 fingers were blackened with frostbite, and exhaustion had settled into her bones like lead. She started climbing anyway. Ice axe into frozen rock. Pull. Right foot finds purchase. Left foot follows. The wind hit her like a physical blow, trying to peel her from the mountain. Her frozen fingers barely gripped the axe. Each placement had to be perfect. One mistake meant a 1,000-foot fall onto rocks that would scatter her bones across the wastes. Halfway up, the mountain groaned. Kira looked up and saw the snowpack shifting, thousands of tons of ice and stone preparing to break free. She had seconds to decide, find shelter in a cliff pocket and wait it out, missing the bloom window and watching the wolf die, or climb faster and race the avalanche. Her muscles screamed. Her body begged for rest. She climbed faster. The avalanche broke with a sound like the world ending. Snow and ice roared down the cliff face, erasing her lower route. Kira drove her axes in hard and held on as the wave of white death tried to tear her loose. Her harness rope sang with tension. Her shoulders threatened to dislocate. Then she was through it, gasping, still climbing. The summit appeared through the storm, a narrow shelf of stone where reality felt thin. Moon lilies carpeted the ground, their silver-blue petals glowing with captured starlight. Kira fell to her knees and harvested frantically, stuffing flowers into every pocket and pouch. The mountain groaned again, deeper this time. The major avalanche hit like divine wrath. The entire peak seemed to shear away. Kira saw an ice cave pocket and dove for it as the world became white chaos. She pressed herself into the tiny space as millions of tons of snow and rock thundered past, the sound so loud it ceased to be sound and became pure pressure. Then silence. Kira crawled from the cave into a transformed landscape. The cliff face she'd climbed was gone, replaced by a massive debris field. She spotted a smooth section of ice, threw herself onto it, and rode the slope down in a barely controlled fall that was half slide, half prayer. She hit the bottom hard. Something in her shoulder popped. Sickeningly. Her ribs cracked. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only crawl through snow that turned red behind her. The cave shelter appeared like salvation. The wolf's amber eyes tracked her movements, desperate and fading. Kira's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she crushed moon lily petals with the last two ingredients, mixing them with melted snow into a paste that glowed faintly silver. She had to try 3 times to apply it to his wound, her broken body barely responding to commands. The purple-black veins began to recede, faster now, pulled back by the completed cure. "If you survive," Kira whispered, her vision tunneling, "tell someone I tried." Darkness took her gently, like an old friend she'd been avoiding for too long. The last thing she felt was warmth, the wolf's massive body shifting, pressing close to share heat as the death veil held its fury outside their fragile shelter. Warmth. That was the first sensation that penetrated Kira's consciousness, actual warmth, not the memory of it. She opened her eyes to firelight dancing across cave walls, the death veil's howl reduced to distant wind. Her injuries had been bandaged. Crude work, but effective, torn strips of what looked like an expensive shirt binding her ribs and shoulder. Someone had repositioned her broken bones while she was unconscious. The black wolf was gone. In its place sat a man who had no business existing outside of royal portraits and fevered dreams. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet of coiled muscle and predatory grace. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, still damp from melted snow. His amber eyes, flecked with gold, caught the firelight as he fed wood to the flames. He wore her spare cloak like it was wolf pelts and crown jewels, moving with the unconscious authority of someone who'd never questioned his right to space. He looked up and Kira's breath caught. Devastatingly handsome didn't cover it. This was the face that launched territorial wars and inspired ballads. This was power made flesh. "You saved my life," he said, his voice rough from disuse. 3 times over. Kira's mind finally connected the pieces. Royal bearing. Shadow thorn poison. Those distinctive amber gold eyes she'd seen in exactly one portrait, hanging in her old pack's great hall. "You're the Alpha King. Theron Nightshade." He inclined his head slightly. "And you're Kira, who faced death 3 times for a dying wolf." Panic hit her like ice water. "I saved the king. I'm a rogue. They'll execute me for even touching you." "No one touches you." The command in his voice could have stopped armies. Ever. You don't understand. I'm exiled. Packless. The law says. I felt it the moment consciousness returned. Theron stood, moving toward her with predatory fluidity. The bond. Kira tried to stand, fell back as her broken ribs screamed protest. Impossible. You're the Alpha King. I'm an exiled Omega. The mate bond doesn't. The bond doesn't care about rank. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could see gold flecks swirling in his irises. It cares about souls. And yours called to mine while I lay dying. No. But even as she said it, she felt it, a golden thread connecting them, thrumming with recognition and heat. You're my fated mate, Kira. My Luna. I didn't survive exile to become someone's possession. She met his eyes without flinching. I won't trade Alpha Broderick's chains for royal ones. Something fierce and approving flashed across Theron's face. Not possession. Partnership. But first, the sound of helicopter rotors cut through the morning air. Theron's head snapped up, scenting the wind. My guard. But also, his expression darkened. The assassins. They've tracked my recovery. Figures materialized from the tree line, 6 trained killers moving in perfect formation. Behind them, a royal helicopter descended, too far away to help in time. Kira grabbed her bow with her good arm. Can you fight? Theron's grin was all predator. Watch me. He shifted partially, not full wolf, but something between. Claws erupted from his fingers. His muscles expanded. His eyes blazed pure gold. They moved as one unit, no discussion needed. Kira's arrows found throats and hearts with surgical precision despite her injuries. Theron was a whirlwind of claws and brutal efficiency. When an assassin got past her guard, Theron was there. When 2 flanked him, her arrows dropped them. The last assassin fell as the helicopter touched down. A scarred commander in Royal Guard armor emerged, weapon drawn, and stopped dead. Your Majesty. His eyes tracked to Kira, taking in her rogue marks, her warrior bearing, the way she stood beside the king. And a rogue Omega warrior. Theron's arm wrapped around Kira's waist, steadying her and claiming her simultaneously. My mate. She will be your Luna. The commander's shock was evident, but he dropped to one knee. As you command, Your Majesty. Kira looked up at Theron. I haven't agreed to anything. His smile was softer now, meant only for her. I know. But you will. The shadow spire rose from volcanic rock like a crown of black glass, its obsidian towers catching the dying light and throwing it back in shards of purple and midnight blue. Kira had seen it in tapestries and heard it described in songs, but nothing prepared her for the reality, a palace built to intimidate, to remind everyone who entered that they stood in the heart of absolute power. The helicopter landed on a courtyard of polished stone where servants in midnight livery waited. They looked at Kira the way scholars might examine an unusual insect, curious, slightly repulsed, already forming theories. She stepped out in battered leather armor, dried blood still staining the edges, frostbite blackening her fingertips. The courtiers wore silks that cost more than a year's worth of hunting game. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. The rogue who saved the king, someone whispered, not bothering to be quiet. Can you smell the wastes on her? Theron's hand found her lower back, possessive and protective. But before he could speak, A woman descended the palace steps with the fluid grace of an apex predator in silk form. Lady Seraphina Nightshade was everything Kira wasn't: elegant, refined, her dark hair arranged in intricate braids, her emerald dress fitted perfectly to her alpha curves. She was beautiful the way winter storms were beautiful, distant, powerful, and absolutely deadly. Cousin. Seraphina kissed Theron's cheeks, her amber eyes sliding to Kira with assessment that could have filleted flesh. And this must be your savior. The pause before savior spoke volumes. The welcome feast was orchestrated intimidation. 300 nobles packed the grand hall, their conversations dying to whispers as Kira entered. She sat at the high table beside Theron, aware of every eye tracking her movements, every lip curling in barely concealed disdain. Seraphina stood, raising her crystal goblet. To our king's miraculous survival, and to the brave warrior who aided him. May she find her place among us. The court drank. Kira lifted her glass and stopped, nostrils flaring. The scent was subtle, hidden beneath expensive wine and spelled to mask its signature. But she'd brewed enough poisons in exile to recognize Mubane even in trace amounts. This wine is poisoned. Silence crashed over the hall like a physical force. Seraphina's perfect smile never wavered. Surely you're mistaken, dear. Our wine comes from the royal cellars, tested by the king's own tasters. Then you won't mind drinking from my glass. Kira pushed it across the table. The smile froze. I have a delicate constitution. Red wine often. You just drank a full glass of it. Kira's voice cut through the excuse like one of her daggers. Drink mine. Seraphina set down her goblet, her hand trembling, not with fear, Kira realized, but with rage at being outmaneuvered. I'm feeling unwell. Please excuse me. Theron's expression could have frozen the sun. Seraphina. Stay. But she was already gliding toward the exit, her ladies-in-waiting forming a protective barrier. Theron couldn't prove anything without the wine, and testing it now would show he doubted his own court's security. The feast continued in strained silence until Lord Chancellor Aldrich stood, clearing his throat. As is tradition, the chosen Luna must prove her worth through the tournament of trials. A series of challenges testing combat prowess, strategic thinking, and leadership capacity. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The tournament was designed for noble-born she-wolves raised in court politics and formal combat, not rogue omegas who'd survived through cunning and desperation. Seraphina reappeared in the doorway, her illness apparently cured. Perhaps, dear Kira, you might consider stepping aside. The tournament is quite demanding. It would spare you the humiliation of. I've faced 3 death trials in a single day. Kira met those cold amber eyes without flinching. Your tournament is practice. The gauntlet was thrown. The arena floor was ancient stone stained with centuries of blood. 3 alpha warriors entered from opposite gates, each a head taller than Kira and twice her mass. The crowd filled the tiered seats, nobility in silk and jewels come to watch the rogue Omega be humbled. Seraphina sat in the place of honor beside Theron's empty throne. He'd recused himself from judging, her smile sharp as broken glass. The gong sounded. The alphas came at her like a coordinated storm, expecting to overwhelm her with raw power. The first swing would have taken her head off if she'd been there to receive it. She wasn't. Kira dropped low, her dagger opening the warrior's hamstring as she rolled past. He went down roaring. The crowd gasped. She didn't fight like an Omega or even a Beta. She fought like water, fluid, relentless, finding every gap in their defenses. When they used strength, she used momentum. When they coordinated, she created chaos. Her arrows found joints and pressure points. Her daggers sang through the spaces between armor plates. 12 minutes later, all three alphas lay groaning on blood-slicked stone. The arena sat in stunned silence until someone started clapping. Then another. The Omega section erupted in cheers that the nobles couldn't quite suppress. "She fights like something else entirely," Lord Aldrich muttered, making notes. The strategy trial was war rendered into chess pieces and map tables. Kira commanded theoretical troops against a simulated invasion, with the court's military advisors judging her decisions. The intelligence reports felt wrong immediately, too convenient, the enemy positions too predictable. Serafina's sabotage. Rather than correct course, Kira leaned into it. She made decisions based on the false intelligence, loudly and publicly. Then she quietly repositioned her actual forces to counter where the enemy would be if someone was feeding them her plans. When the simulation concluded, her trap had caught two court nobles red-handed passing strategic information. They'd thought they were exploiting her mistakes. Instead, she'd used them to expose Serafina's spy network. Theron's eyes gleamed with predatory approval. She doesn't just survive. She hunts. The leadership trial was meant to be theoretical, a simulated crisis to test command presence. But the fire in the Omega wing was real, smoke already billowing from windows, screams echoing as flames trapped servants on upper floors. The court expected Kira to organize rescue teams, to command from safety like a proper Luna. She ran directly into the fire. Smoke choked her lungs. Heat blistered her skin. She found them on the third floor, 6 Omegas huddled in a corner, flames cutting off escape. Kira ripped down burning tapestries with her bare hands, creating a path. She carried out those who couldn't walk, her shoulders screaming. Led those who could through smoke so thick she navigated by memory and instinct. When she emerged with the last Omega, her arms were burned, her hair singed, soot coating her face. The Omega witnesses stared at her with something like reverence. She's one of us. She didn't forget where she came from. That night, Kira's chamber door opened with a silence that shouldn't have been possible with the spelled locks. The assassin was shadow and steel, moonlight glinting off the poisoned blade aimed for her heart. But Kira slept light, exile had taught her that, and she was already moving when the blade fell. They fought across the darkened room in brutal silence. The assassin was skilled, trained by someone who understood royal security. But Kira had survived 5 years in the wastes against worse odds. She used furniture as weapons, curtains as nets, turned the room itself into a trap. She took a slash across her ribs, but caught the assassin's wrist, twisted, heard bone snap. Her dagger found the gap between helmet and armor. "Who sent you?" The assassin's eyes, visible through the helm's slits, flickered toward the window, toward the tower where Serafina's chambers blazed with light. "Lady Serafina promised gold," the assassin gasped. "Said the king would reward her for eliminating the rogue threat." Kira bound the assassin's wounds just enough to keep them alive, then dragged them through the pre-dawn corridors to Theron's war room. She dropped the bleeding, bound assassin at his feet. "Your cousin sends her regards." The great hall fell silent as Kira's voice rang out, clear and unwavering despite the burns bandaging her arms. Lady Seraphina Nightshade, I accuse you of treason, conspiracy to murder, and crimes against the crown. Seraphina rose from her seat with liquid grace, her smile never faltering. Bold words from a rogue who stumbled into our court covered in blood and desperation. She turned to address the assembled nobles. I invoke my ancient right, trial by combat in the circle of judgment. The crowd erupted. The circle of judgment was old law, older than the shadow spire itself. Sacred ground where disputes were settled with blade and blood, where even the Alpha King could not interfere without invalidating the accuser's claim. Theron's hand found Kira's wrist, his grip tight with restrained fury. You don't have to accept. There are other ways. She'll use every delay to strike again. Kira met his amber eyes. This ends now. The circle was carved into stone in the palace courtyard, ancient runes glowing faintly in the torchlight. Kira stepped inside, feeling the magic seal behind her. No one could enter or leave until the combat concluded. Seraphina entered from the opposite side, already shifted partially, her alpha strength making the air shimmer around her. I'll try to make this quick, Seraphina purred. For Theron's sake. She moved like lightning, pure alpha power behind every strike. Her claws raked across Kira's shoulder, drawing first blood. A backhand sent Kira sprawling across the stone. The crowd roared. Kira rolled to her feet, tasting copper. Seraphina was stronger, larger, trained by the finest weapons masters since childhood. Direct confrontation would be suicide. So Kira stopped fighting directly. She used the circle itself, the slight elevation changes, the weathered stone that crumbled under pressure. When Seraphina charged, Kira dodged and let that alpha momentum carry her cousin into the barrier runes, which sparked and burned. She grabbed a fallen torch, using fire to create distance and distraction. Minutes bled into each other, marked by blood and exhaustion. Seraphina's superior strength began to wear Kira down. A brutal combination drove Kira to the ground. Seraphina's hand closed around her throat, claws pressing against her jugular. You should have stayed in the wastes, Seraphina hissed, triumph blazing in her eyes. Kira's hand moved to her left bracer, the one she'd worn since exile, that no one had thought to check. The hidden dart was coated with paralytic venom, non-lethal but effective. She pressed the release. The dart buried itself in Seraphina's neck. The alpha's eyes went wide with shock as her muscles locked, her body going rigid. She toppled sideways, conscious but unable to move. Kira stood on trembling legs, drew her dagger, and pressed the blade to Seraphina's throat. The traditional end. The expected end. The crowd held its breath. I could kill you, Kira said quietly, so only Seraphina could hear. The law gives me that right. You tried to murder me, to poison me, to destroy me. She pressed the blade harder, drawing a thin line of blood. But I'm not here to rule through fear. I'm here to change what ruling means. She straightened, addressing the assembled court. I claim victory. Lady Seraphina's life is forfeit by ancient law. She paused, letting that sink in. I choose exile instead of execution. Let her survive in the wastes as I did. Let her learn what strength really means. The courtyard erupted in chaos, some shouting approval, others crying foul. Through it all, Theron's gaze never left Kira's face. When the circle's magic released and she stumbled out, he caught her. You showed mercy to someone who would have killed you without hesitation. I showed justice. Kira's legs finally gave out, and he held her upright. There's a difference. Lord Aldrich approached, his ancient face unreadable. Then he knelt. My Luna. One by one, the court followed, some reluctantly, some with genuine respect. Even the Omegas who'd watched from the margins came forward, kneeling not in submission but in solidarity. Theron's voice was low, meant only for her. She's stronger than any of us. And she doesn't even know it yet. The Luna ceremony took place at dawn, when shadow and light existed in perfect balance. Kira walked down the obsidian aisle in a gown that would have scandalized traditionalists, midnight leather reinforced with silver threading, a warrior's armor transformed into regalia. Her bow hung across her back. Her scars remained visible, badges of survival she refused to hide. The court watched in silence that felt like held breath. Theron waited at the altar in ceremonial armor, but when she reached him, he did something no Alpha King had done in recorded history. He knelt. I pledge to stand beside you, his voice carried through the hall, never above you. To rule with you, not over you. To honor your strength in all its forms. Kira's hand trembled as she helped him rise. When she spoke her vows, they were her own words, not the ancient script. I will lead with both the heart of a healer and the soul of a warrior. I will fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. And I will never forget what it means to survive. The crown settled on her head, obsidian and silver, designed to complement rather than overwhelm. Lord Aldrich stepped forward with the ceremonial question, Does the court accept this, Luna? The howl that erupted shook the palace foundations. Not the obligatory response of subjects to authority, but genuine acceptance. The Omegas howled loudest of all. Afterward, Theron led her outside where a horse waited. They rode for hours into the whitewater wastes, and Kira's breath caught when she saw what he'd built. Where the cave shelter had been, where she'd saved his life and nearly lost her own, now stood a fortress unlike any she'd seen. Training grounds occupied one half, archery ranges, combat circles, obstacle courses designed to hone speed and strategy over brute strength. The other half bloomed with healing gardens, medicinal herbs, moon lilies transplanted and thriving, phoenix tear flowers under enchanted glass. A fortress and a sanctuary, Theron said quietly. For the warrior and the healer. Both parts of who you are. Kira walked through gardens where Omega refugees, those fleeing forced bonds and abusive pacts, were already learning to defend themselves alongside learning to heal. Young women practiced with bows while tending herb gardens. Strength and compassion, cultivated together. You built a home for all of me, she whispered, tears tracking down her cheeks. They stood together in the cave shelter that night, now preserved as the fortress's heart. The same stone where she'd mixed antidotes with frozen fingers. The same floor where she'd collapsed, certain she would die. I faced 3 trials to save you, Kira said, her hand finding his. You've given me a kingdom where no Omega has to choose between freedom and survival. Theron pulled her close, his amber eyes reflecting firelight. You didn't just save my life. You saved what kind of king I could be. What kind of kingdom this could become. They stood together as equals, Luna and king, warrior and leader, survivors who'd found each other in death's shadow and chosen to build something new in the light. Kira looked out over the wastes where she'd been exiled, where she'd suffered and grown strong, where she'd made the choice that changed everything. She thought of the girl who'd refused Alpha Broderick's chains, who'd walked into exile with nothing but pride and principle. That girl had become Luna not by becoming less, but by being relentlessly, unapologetically more. "What would you risk for freedom?" she asked the wind, knowing the answer lived in every scar on her body, every lesson the wastes had taught her. For love? For the chance to rewrite the rules that say Omegas must submit and strength only means dominance. Theron's arms tightened around her. "You've already shown them. Now we build a kingdom worthy of that answer." In the distance, wolves howled, not in dominance or submission, but in recognition. The new Luna had arrived, and she would teach them all what strength really meant. The trials had forged her. The kingdom would be her anvil. And the future? That was a story still being written, one choice at a time.